Hi everyone, hello and welcome to today's live training on the 3 mistakes almost all writers make, especially in the beginning. I'm thrilled to have you here. It's been a long time since we did interviews and trainings like this one. I'll be joined by my dear friend and top medium writer Ayo today. He'll be here in a minute or two. So we can get started and learn more about his takes. In the meantime, feel free to hop into the chat. Let me know where you're joining from. I know that our community has grown a lot over the last couple of weeks and months. So let me know if this is the first live interview you're joining, or if you've been to any of my events before. And while we're waiting for Ayo to arrive, feel free to also use the chat and the comment box to just drop any kind of question there that you feel like has been holding you back lately. We will have some time for a Q&A at the very end of this session, but I'm also right here, right now. So up until the point Ayo joins us, I'm happy to take a look at your questions and discuss some minor issues with you. If you have any questions, if you have anything that's been bothering you, anything you feel like you're not 100% confident about when it comes to your writing or your journey on Medium, maybe there is something you just haven't figured out just yet, feel free to let us know so we know what to dive deeper into at the end of the session when Ayo is here and when we're done talking about the 3 mistakes. For those of you who don't know Ayo yet, I'll do a quick intro just so you know who you'll be listening to. Ayo has built his audience, the vast majority of his audience, writing on Medium, and that's also how we connected. Ayo has been one of the first authors I have followed, one of the first people I have learned a lot from as a writer in my personal journey. He has, in the meantime, grown his audience to over 100,000 followers on Medium, tens of thousands of subscribers in his email list. He has created different offers, from courses to a membership called the Writers League recently, and has been on the mission to support writers and individuals who want to use the opportunity to write and create on the internet to grow an audience and income. And he has just joined us. Hey, Ayo.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. Welcome. I just finished doing a quick intro about you. Do you want to give us a short elevator pitch about you and your work for those who don't know you yet?
Yeah. So I got started writing about 8 years ago. It was something I was always interested in doing. But then I had a friend ask me to write an article for his website. And I think he could kind of tell that I like to write because I was always posting little things on social media. He gave me that opportunity to write on his site. And the rest is history. Like, I've been writing quite literally every day, unless I was like ill. I've been writing every day for almost a decade. I made my really made my name and like made a lot of my income and built my business off of Medium, which is where me and Sinem met and became friends. And so now I am a self-improvement author and have my own full-time business as a writer doing that. And then I also have another business where I help writers like you, similar to what Sinem is doing, so that you can not only write, but turn it into a business and something that you can do full time and support your lifestyle.
Awesome. I am going to make the assumption that you did make some mistakes during your journey. And even if you didn't make the mistakes yourself, you've seen a lot of people make some mistakes over the last couple of years. And that's what we want to talk about today. And we're going to break it up into 3 parts. We're going to talk about a very typical writing mistake, a mistake on the business side of writing, which is something a lot of writers don't want to talk about. They want to focus on the writing. But if you want to write for a living, you have to think about the business side too. And then the third aspect is the mindset. And I think that's an underrated aspect too. It's like, how do you show up? How do you commit to showing up and doing the work you want to do? And I want to start with writing. Ayo, do you have any idea how many articles you've published over the last 8 years?
No clue, but it's in the hundreds,
Yeah.
if not 1,000 or more.
Probably in the thousands. I think I am around 600 now.
Yeah.
So you
So
must be
probably
close to the 1,000. Yeah.
Definitely 1,000 plus at least.
When you look back at how you started to write and look at the tremendous amount of feedback you give to writers who are just starting out, what is a typical writing mistake you see? Like focusing on the actual piece you write, the writing you do, what is something that you see over and over again that you've probably done the wrong way yourself?
I think the biggest mistake writers make is that they don't come up with an intention and a reason for writing the article before they sit down to write. And they also don't try to figure out what they're going to say before they write. So, like, let's break that down into two things. The biggest mistake, especially on places on Medium, it is very clear that they didn't come up with a solid reason to write that piece to begin with, other than it was something they just wanted to write, right? So you'll see people, if you go to their profile, there'll be a random story about their vacation, a random story about their dog, then they'll be writing about all these different topics. And it's kind of like they just were like, oh, okay, I felt like writing this today. Let me just write it and see what happens. And a lot of these posts end up looking essentially like a journal entry. And it's not relatable, because if your intention is to write for an audience, even if you are writing a personal essay or a story about yourself, you want to come up with that compelling reason first. So if you want to write a story, set the intention that you are going to write a story about yourself that has a theme in common with readers. So, like, tell a story about a transformation you made, tell a story about common problems you solved, tell a story about some sort of like societal issue that a lot of people care about. And then actually figure out what you're going to say beforehand by creating an outline and piecing together the words. So, like, the way I think about articles, like a lot of writers look at writing as like you just sit down at the page and write. The way I look at writing is that you're more of an architect, where you're creating the blueprint for what you are trying to get across first, and then you just fill it in with words. So it makes the process a lot easier. But probably lack of figuring out what the intention behind the piece is. And then a lot of writers don't outline their work beforehand, and it shows, because their articles, you get writer's block, and it's very hard for you to write the article because you don't know what you're going to say, and you might end up going off in 10 different directions while you're writing. And then your posts are really hard to edit because there's really no like guide, there's really no GPS, so to speak, for what you're looking for to edit. So those would be the biggest overall mistake, is just not being very intentional about what you're putting out, why you're putting it out, why anyone aside from you would care about it, and then just kind of randomly doing your own thing. And that's where a lot of writers struggle.
This actually reminds me of something, and I think this is part of Medium's official guidelines too. It's like, is this story useful for the reader? When you write about something that just came to your mind, or just that you just want to write about without having an outline, without knowing why the piece should be written in the first place, in most cases, it's going to end up not being really useful, because it's going to read like a journal entry, or it's not going to be structured very well. The message is not going to come across, or you're going to have 5 different sub stories in one article, which is going to be confusing. And if something is confusing, most people will not read it. If you ask yourself, is my story useful? And if you are able to give an honest answer, you are often going to have a good reason for why people are clicking or not clicking on a story title as well. If your story is useful, it's much easier to craft the compelling packaging too. A compelling title that communicates the idea of the title. Some people are naturally more gifted at titles than others. Some people are coming from a marketing background and they have a bigger idea on what copywriting principles are and how to make people click, while others are more passionate writers who've never thought of the marketing side, and it's harder to focus on the packaging. But I feel like the more you think about the usefulness of your story, the easier it becomes to also create a packaging that makes sense and that is compelling. And it's kind of a two-way street, right? Without the packaging, you could have the most useful story and it's not going to be discovered and read. And vice versa. If you have great packaging, but what's inside sucks, people are going to be pissed and they're not going to come back. They're not going to follow. They're not going to become fans of your work. It's a great points there.
Correct.
Let's assume somebody has figured out how to write well, how to come up with compelling topics and with sexy titles, great title images and subtitles. They're publishing consistently. They're getting their work in front of an audience. What is business-wise the biggest mistake you see and that you probably made yourself? What is the biggest business thing holding writers back?
Number one, I'd say above all else, is not building an email list soon enough, or not doing it at all. Like, I've actually seen some people build really large followings, but then they don't have an email list or like a way to support their business independent of writing platforms. Like, for example, I just had a private conversation with a woman who was writing on Medium, and with Medium or any writing platform, there's fluctuations. Sometimes earnings go up, sometimes they go down, right? But since she didn't start building an email list, she was very popular. She's a very popular writer. But now that her income is fluctuating up and down, she is totally reliant on the whims of the writing platform for her income. But had she been building an email list, she would have had a way to communicate with people who would be more interested in pursuing something further, whether that's working with her as a coach or buying a product or a book or something like that. And in general, I think a lot of writers and creators, they don't understand that in the long run, your primary goal should be to build something that you own, that you have control over. And like, even myself, I did really well. I did extremely well on Medium. I probably made more money on Medium than maybe most people, except for maybe like a handful of people, right? But at the same time, I wasn't just like making Medium plan. I was building an email list. I have created products. I've created products around my self-improvement writing. I've created products for helping other writers. So I wasn't just relying on that one source. And I knew for a fact, because I had been through different writing platforms. Like, I've seen writing platforms come and go. But I knew, because I have my list, well, then if I have a new platform I want to get on, I already have a bunch of subscribers and I could send them content to that, send traffic. Anything I want to launch something new, I have people I can send traffic to. And I think it's the lack of building a list, and then it's the like getting overly intimidated by these next steps. Like, I'm sure you run into this too, where I have seen writers they have been talking about getting an email list started for years. And it's like, dude, go sign up for ConvertKit, go sign up for your software, fumble around. Like, I wasn't perfect. I didn't have the perfect marketing, or I didn't know copywriting and how to make these perfect lead magnets. I just started doing stuff. And so I think it's like that lack of willingness to like kind of dive in and figure out some of that business stuff without all the answers up front, that I think holds a lot of people back as well.
When did you start your email list?
Probably
Did
about.
you do it right away?
I waited like a year. So I was writing on Thought Catalog, for like a year, about a year. I was writing for the Huffington Post, these other different places, and I was just excited because like the articles were getting views. So I was like, yay, views, right? But views can't, well, views can pay your bills if it's on Medium, but like in other places, you're not gonna, like most places, you're not going to get directly paid for views like that. Medium is kind of unique in that way. But then right around the time when I got onto Medium, I was actually working on a book. So I started giving away like the first couple chapters of the book as my first lead magnet. And then about a year in, when I was writing on Medium, after I just found it, then I started doing it. But yeah, otherwise, but I had gotten a lot of views in that year too, and it was fun. I got her, but it was like a ship with leaks in it, that there are people who would have bought stuff from me and been lifelong fans. Just they read my article. Oh, that's a great article. Maybe I see IO again. Maybe I don't.
Yeah. It's crazy if you know how the whole newsletter business model works, or how the majority of creators make money online, how writers can support themselves through their own newsletter. If you think about it, if you have one piece of viral content, especially on Medium, my highest performing stories, my most viewed stories, have about 400,000 views. If you have a proper and aligned like call to action at the end of an article like that, and you send people to an opt-in page, to a freebie that is aligned with the piece, and you have a teeny tiny percentage of those viewers sign up for an email list and sign up for the right kind of emails that you're sending them, you have a business. Suddenly you go from being a creator for one specific platform or being a writer to having your own business. It's a totally different game, and it can, theoretically, it could happen like overnight if a random piece of content goes viral. And I don't know about you, but I can say I have a pretty good sense for which stories I write will perform better than others. I know if an idea is a more niche idea that I focus on because I just think it's worth exploring. And I know which ideas are more broad and have a bigger opportunity to reach the masses. And you still don't know for 100%. You just never know which story is going to take off, especially if you're in the beginning. Like I had that, like when I had my first viral stories, it was like, boom, total outliers, way more views than my other content. And I couldn't really put my finger on why. I felt like I was doing the same thing. It just happened. If you don't have an email list right then, you lose, well, you miss out on a huge potential, because you could be connecting with super fans who eventually become your first book buyers, who book your coaching, book your courses, someone who invites you to speak on a stage somewhere or on a virtual summit, whatever it is. And then the second thing I wanted to add is I think a lot of people, when we're talking about Medium, vastly underestimate how powerful it actually is that you can have a call to action right there at the bottom of your article. If you think of most huge content platforms like Instagram, like Twitter, even LinkedIn, you don't, like, the way you attach your call to action isn't as natural as it is on Medium. Like you always have a workaround, like click the link in my bio or something like that, or link in the first comment. The flow on Medium is so different. And then the other huge benefit you obviously have is if you enjoy writing and you want to write, that's the majority of the work you want to do in your business. You have writing and readers on Medium, and then you have a call to action to a product, your newsletter, which basically requires you to continue writing. And a lot of people get intimidated by the idea of writing a newsletter because they don't look at it as writing. And I hated writing my first couple of newsletters. How was it for you? Did you enjoy writing your first few newsletters?
Dude, I loved it. And I think maybe I got lucky. It's like the way I was wired or like I'm just super curious. Like I just love to talk too. Like pretty much from day one when I was writing, I was like, dude, everybody, like, this is great. Like everybody needs to hear this. Like I'm spitting fire on it. Of course it was terrible. But I was just too dumb to know any better. I was like, yeah, dude, I'll write this email, I'll write this post, like I'll write anything. And like it was so bad for me, even like sometimes my posts would have like typos in them, and like I was just like kind of reckless with it. But it was because like I wasn't afraid of like making a mistake, or like I just didn't see like a big deal. It's like, oh, I'll write an email. Yeah, it's like kind of like a blog post, like a little different. Let me try, see what happens. And then you just get data based off of what works and what doesn't. And then you learn new things, and then you get a little bit more advanced. You're like, oh, okay, I got to have the compelling subject line and the hook. I got to learn how to write copy. I got to build anticipation. Like some of that stuff comes over time. But in the beginning, I started writing a newsletter like pretty much right away, like a formal one. So like I was in the self-improvement space, and I was like, hey, let me come up with an idea for a newsletter. Like, oh, let me write like a newsletter on every Monday called like, and I'll call it Monday Motivation, right? Put a little alliteration to it. So the speed from idea to execution was very fast. And I think in a lot of different places, like it's that speed from idea to execution. I guess I just didn't care either, because what I realized, like the kind of the biggest benefit of having a small audience, dude, nobody is gonna remember that crappy email you wrote 4 years ago, dude. Like no one's gonna remember. I have horrible writing littered all over the internet that nobody knows exists. They only see me as bio, big writer, big name writer. Like it's like the past didn't even happen. So it's like, dude, all the stuff you guys are experimenting with in the beginning, I promise you, one, nobody cares that much. I promise you too that once you make it to the finish line and people know who you are, that's all they're going to remember. So you shouldn't even be worried about making any mistakes, because there aren't that many people watching anyway. And then they'll forget about it in like 2 seconds. So like, what's the big deal,
Yeah, that's so true. And still, I feel like for me, writing and sending a newsletter felt much more intimidating than writing blog posts. Somehow I got really afraid of this idea of my stuff actually popping up in somebody's email inbox.
Yeah.
And it took me probably 6 to 9 months to enjoy the process. And by now, email marketing and sending newsletters is my absolute favorite thing to do, because I realized it's the most fun part of my work. It's the part where I get to actually communicate with people. If you write on platforms, you have to stick to certain rules. You format a certain way. You typically don't use memes and emojis, and you don't A/B test your title, and you can do all of that in your email newsletter, and you can let it be much more fun and casual. I sent a newsletter today with photos from my latest location. I wouldn't write a blog post about that because nobody cares, but I can write a short intro to an email about that, because my email subscribers, that's a totally different relationship. And it took me time to realize that this is the most fun writing I can do. And to wrap this up, I guess my biggest learning just is you can never be too early to start your newsletter. No matter how much it sucks, how inconsistent you send your emails, the sooner you start, the better you'll be off. The sooner you start, the sooner it will grow, the sooner you will figure things out. I want to move to our third part, to our mindset part. I just want to remind the audience that you can put your questions into the chat box if there is anything that wasn't clear to you, if there's anything you want to know. Feel free to use the chat to drop your questions, and we can take a look in a couple of minutes. Talking about how people write, with the intentions they write with, how they start to build their businesses, what is the most common mistake you feel like is holding people back from actually achieving their dreams and goals? when creating online?
I think the biggest thing, and this is general, like a general life principle, it's like thinking doesn't solve problems. Action solves problems. Now, does this mean you shouldn't put any plans or thought into what you do? Obviously not. Like, I don't just launch a product without putting thought into what I'm going to make. I don't do a post without putting thought into it. But what a lot of writers do is like they think themselves into a trap. Like, for example, like they ask questions like, oh, how, like what niche or what topic do I need to go through? Like, should I do multiple? Should I do the same thing? And eventually, like, you hash that conversation out with yourself. But like the what niche should I pick topic, that conversation with yourself shouldn't last longer than a couple days. I've seen people get stuck on this question for long periods of time. They get stuck on other questions like, which platform should I write on? Which software should I use? And it's like, you will learn so much more by trying things and failing and correcting your mistakes and getting better than thinking. And it's like, you have to enter the arena. It's like another thing a lot of writers will do. They'll have all these drafts, all these notebooks full of journals, but they haven't published anything. And I tell them, like, writing a lot of drafts is like, and it's like an athlete who practices a sport, but then they never play in any games, right? So if you are an athlete, like, one of the ways that you learn how to get better at your sport is you watch game film. You watch yourself playing live when the stakes are high. If you want to get better at writing, you should review your published work, because you're going to get better. You're going to get more informed feedback based on whether or not people liked it. That's going to guide your decisions moving forward. So like, a lot of people are trying to, like, they want 100% of the information up front, and it's not going to solve their problems. It's not going to solve that problem of them pulling the trigger, because I guarantee I could give you a 97-page marketing plan. I could pick the niche for you. I could tell you what articles to write. I could give you the headlines. I could give you the outlines. I could give you the copy and everything. But you still have to write the emails. You still have to execute the plan. And I think a lot of people use planning as a procrastination technique instead of creating loose plans, executing those plans, and treating it like an experiment. So that's why I tell people, like, if you're just starting out, pick a topic to run with for 90 days and test it out. And then you'll know whether or not it's something you like to do after you've tried it. But a lot of people, like, they're afraid of wasting time, so they don't do anything, which just wastes even more time. So it's really just like throwing yourself into the arena. Like, too many people are on the sidelines. Like, you even see questions like, here, is it a good idea to offer a freebie in the beginning? Like, yeah, so go make the freebie. Go get the freebie done this week, then send it out. Then you'll know whether or not people like it. Like, don't be in a position where 3 months from now you're still asking about freebies. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people, is they have the same questions over and over, but they don't go get the answers, or they don't try to execute. Like, all the information out there is freely available, but like, me or Sinem, we can't sit next to you on the computer and do your lead magnet for you, or we can't sit there every single day and wake up, pour you a cup of coffee, get your outline out for you, and, hit publish for you. Like, you have to do some of that stuff. So I think, honestly, the biggest mindset thing is just like fear of putting yourself into the arena. And like, that's probably the number one problem human beings need to solve in their life, is like taking whatever your plans are and stepping into the arena and getting beat up a little bit. Like, you will go through some rough patches, but that's what's going to inform you in your decisions moving forward. So just like, stop being scared, just go do it.
Yeah. And I think there are two sides of it, and you can look at it as good news or bad news. The first arena you step into is going to be pretty much empty. As I said before, like, most people, like, very few people will care about the first few posts you write, the first few newsletters you write, your first freebie, even your first products. you will have to do a lot of that in silence and without getting a lot of feedback, because that's the way it works. You have to make noise. You have to be consistent and be visible for a long time for a significant amount of people to just discover you and get connected and feel connected to you. That's good news, because you don't have to overcomplicate things. Allow yourself to make mistakes and just move fast. The faster you move, the faster you learn, the more data you will have, the more feedback you will get. There's just no way to skip that part, because nobody is magically going to feel connected to you and be a fan of your work if you haven't done all the shitty work before. You might be a fantastic writer, and if you are brand new on a platform and you don't have an existing audience elsewhere, you're still going to be new, and you still have to do all the groundwork to build relationships and build trust. So the faster you move, the faster you will get to that phase where the arena is getting fuller and fuller, and the game is starting to actually be fun and profitable too. Cool. I'm seeing two questions that I think are really exciting, actually. I know you have written and published more than one book.
Yes.
How many books have you published over the last few years?
3.
So we have a question saying, what would be good next steps for someone who wants to publish a book eventually, but is just starting out with writing online, mostly just on Medium? What would you recommend?
That's a good question. So number one, I would you need to write for a while, so that like your writing is good enough for the book to be good, and so that you have an audience of people to sell it to. So like what I wouldn't advise is like having very little writing experience, writing a book and then selling it when you don't have anyone really to sell it to. Like the odds of success aren't very high. Now, what I would do is, if you had a book idea, what you can do is like you can like beta test the ideas that you'd want to include in your book through your blog post. And like that's actually what I do. Like my last book, I published every single section of the book as Medium posts to kind of gauge which stuff people liked and what they didn't. So you can basically, like, if you have this idea for a book, outline make an outline for what the book would be like. So make an outline for what the chapters would be, make an outline for what the sections of the chapters would be, make an outline for the section, like get it real detailed. And then you want to think of your blog post like as sections of a chapter of a book, and then write it out as if you're writing a book. Even Tony, who I believe has said that on when I interviewed him and when Sinem interviewed him, is that you want to have the intention, like basically use Medium as your place to work on your book idea. He was like, you should write your stuff on Medium with the intention to turn it into a book or to write a book. And so you think about all the different little subtopics within what you want your book about, and then you just write about it piece by piece. And then when you get more feedback from what people like, so like let's say a couple articles you write on a specific subject really becomes the core idea for what your book is going to be. Like if you look at someone like James Clear, like he wrote Atomic Habits, was basically him testing out which ideas about habits people liked the most on his blog. And then he picked out the best of the best ideas from that stuff and turned it into a book. Same thing with Mark Manson. His idea for Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck came from an article called Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck that got really, really viral. So like when you use your writing as a field test, like a lot of books actually have come from ideas that people published. And then they found that the people just resonated with it like crazy. And they're like, okay, that's what I'm going to frame my book around. So I would give it some time, and like the main thing I'd focus on is getting your writing out there, which will help you like construct your philosophy of what you want to share with people. And then when you see what the audience responds to, that'll give you a better idea of what your book should be centered around. And then if you're getting that email list and stuff put together, then when you launch a book, it's like my first book, I didn't have an email list. I just kind of launched it and relied on the Amazon algorithm. Didn't do super great. My last book, when I had 30,000 subscribers, sold a lot more copies. So that's my advice for that.
Awesome. So you already talked about using the book idea to decide what to write about in a Medium or on other platforms. So this also applies to all the other platforms you would be using during that journey. And we have another question about niching down, which I find really interesting because I have responded to that question over and over again, and I am really curious to hear what you think. So the question is, how can I pick a niche when I like to write about various subjects? I post articles every day on Medium, but nothing consistent on the same topic. Is that bad?
The eternal niche question. Yeah, this was one we get a lot. Here's what I'll say. There are two different approaches to niching. And there's one where you're like more like you're like hyper specific about what niche you want to write in. And there's people who like to write about multiple things. I've seen both work. Now, here's the pros and cons to each one. If you write about multiple things, you're less likely to be able to kind of build products and stuff around that topic. If you're like the more hyper focused your niche is, the easier it is like on the back end to create something where you're like, oh, if I have a self-improvement course, some people will buy it. But if I have a time management course for entrepreneurs to free more time for their business to get more leads and sales that's specifically catered to their needs, you can sell more of those and you could charge more money for it. Now it's like, oh, what happens when I like to, if you want to write about related subjects, if you want to write about multiple subjects, you can write about subjects that are related to each other. And I've noticed this, like, I won't name names, but a lot of people are like, oh, the niche is you can write about whatever you want. But it's just interesting that like all of them tend to write about how to make money in writing advice. It's weird like that they tell you to write about whatever you want, but their business model is predicated on a very specific goal and problem that they're solving for you that's related to making money, right? So if we're being honest, there's four big topic areas you can focus on. There's health, there's wealth, there's relationships, and then you can look at that like kind of self-improvement lifestyle sort of area. So the way you figure out what you want to go, like the way you figure out what you want to write about is like, think about your life. Like what work experience do you already have? What problems have you already overcome and solved? What do you like to learn about and study? Then you could test that stuff out. Like, again, like James Clear, he got real interested in habits. So he was like learning about habits and then testing the things out and posting it on his blog. So like you go through like the things you're naturally interested in, but then you have to figure out, you have to look and see if there's a matching demand for that problem, for what you like to write about. So it's like, okay, if you want to write about travel, look and see, are there any other travel blogs? Are there people in the travel space that are making money? Are there people with big audiences? And a lot of this stuff is as simple as a Google search, like go search best blogs in your niche, go read Quora answers, go on Reddit forums, go on social media. It's like a lot of people like to think and ponder about niches, but they don't actually go like look and see what people are doing. It's like you should be in Facebook groups looking online to see if there's demand for those topics. So there's that. But mostly people who have this thing that they want to write about all these different topics, and they still like, you have to think about it like a business owner. Like if you owned a business, would you be like, oh, I'm going to start a nail salon, I'm going to start a lawn care company, and I'm going to start a bookkeeping service all at the same time? Like how likely are you that all three of those businesses simultaneously are going to work? It's unlikely. So what I would say is that you should settle on an idea for like kind of like a main topic you want to focus around. And that main topic should be like a little bit more specific than just something broad. So like, don't just say, I'm going to write about self-improvement. Like a good example is like, oh, I'm going to write about habits specifically, kind of thing. You're interested in that. Don't write about maybe just broad level relationship stuff. It's like, I'm going to teach you dating, or it's going to be relationship advice, or it's going to be marriage advice, something like that. So write about one thing most of the time. And then if you want to have stuff to get your rocks off every once in a while, you can do that. Like Sean, who's a good friend of ours, he mainly sticks to writing self-improvement stuff. He'll write about other stuff that's kind of fun for him, like he'll write a satire piece or a fiction piece, but he knows where his bread is buttered. So he will experiment with other stuff, but he knows what makes him money. And it's like, if you want, you have to write about things that make people money. You want to write about topics that people are willing to give you money for, or else you're not going to make money. So if that means like maybe you can't just like, you got to use your head. It's like, all right, how do you see the path of you writing like memoir stories about your dog and making $100,000 a year doing that? You just have to like, draw the line from one place to another. And if you are trying to build a business around your writing, usually the type of writing and the type of business that people actually will pay money for are things that on some level help them make some sort of transformation related to health, wealth, love, or happiness, like some iteration of one of those things. So that's kind of my answer. But then the end of my answer is like, dude, whatever it is, just pick. Like, I actually show people, I teach people how to do market research, and it's like, if you locked yourself in a room and did market research for 2 weeks, you would know. But odds are you haven't done that, and that is why you are still probably pondering a question that you could have solved a long time ago. So it's like, you gotta bite the bullet and do some research. And then, again, if it comes down to you having to do eeny, meeny, miny, mo to pick something, like I've seen so many people like just quit sitting on this question. Like, just try something. That's my answer.
I love the honesty here. And I love that you mentioned how easy it is to just believe what you want to believe and believe in the idea that you could make money writing about anything you want and writing about all your different interests, while there is a very significant difference between people who have an audience of tens of thousands of people who click on every post they publish just because there is trust, there is credibility, and there is just a huge body of work they've done before, compared to a no-name writer who's just showing up and writing about 15 different topics. And of course, if someone wants to sell you their idea of what you should do, and someone wants to sell you their coaching or their course or whatever, the easiest way to convince you, if you haven't niched down yet, if you haven't found your topics yet, and that's the majority of most writers who are in the first couple of months, who are just starting out, it's easy to convince you by saying, hey, you can join this platform and you can write about anything you want, write about your cat, about your dog, about your last vacation, about your mom, and make money. And that person giving you the advice can probably write about anything he wants, but he has done a lot of other things before, probably for half a decade, until he came to that point where he could write whatever he wants and people would actually care. And I love that you mentioned in the beginning that the more specific you are, the easier it is going to build a business out of your writing. And I was just checking out my ConvertKit account. So that's my email marketing tool. I had my first launch generating over $10,000 with an email list of 1,300 people. 1,318 people were on my list when I had a $10,000 launch, because the niche was so narrow, so specific, and because the messaging was so clear. I knew who my target audience was. I knew what the problem was. I knew I could help them solve it. And I was able to make a lot of money. For me at that time, a mind-blowing amount of money with one product launch, because I totally hit the nail and I knew who I was able to help and how. The more topics you cover, the more diverse your audience is, the harder it is to know how exactly to get paid or why they should pay you and for what. Love all the ideas you shared.
No, it's like, dude, it's like, yeah, you could write if you have 300,000 followers and you are basically a savant then yeah, you can write about whatever you want, and all your offers will just, you'll just print cash with them, right? But it's easier. Even like take my example, like I don't even think I necessarily did things the right way. Like I basically wrote really kind of broad level self improvement advice, and the way that I ended up building a 6-figure business and making a bunch of money writing is like I had to be like one of the top 5 writers on a website with millions of writers in order to do that. So I like, or like honestly, like if I were to go all the way, if I could start all the way back to the beginning, I would have picked a more specific thing to talk about. I would have narrowed the avatar so then I could have built something that I could have charged more money for, because the problem was more specific. I could have got the cash flow faster, and I could have quit my job like way earlier than I did. Then once it's like you solve a specific problem, you charge money for that, you help people with that. Then as you begin to develop more skills as an entrepreneur, you can go and do some of that other stuff. It's like, yeah, like I'm not going to knock the approach of, because like what a lot of people do is like, yeah, once you learn content creation skills and you've monetized and stuff and you want to teach other people how to monetize it too, like, yeah, all that stuff is good. But in the beginning, some people are like, oh, like I'm going to be a creator teaching people how to be creators, but I've never created anything. And it's super broad and it's super, and you have, and when you do something like that, you have to basically only regurgitate other people's advice. You're competing with 97 million other people. Or you could be like other examples I've seen. There's this lady, she teaches people like Excel formulas, how to get the most out of Excel, because it's like a really robust tool. She makes like $200,000 a month just teaching people how to make good spreadsheets. So it's like, which one, like which route would make much more sense? Like I'm in the position now where like I have like just grown my audience so big this way that like it kind of is what it is. I'm just navigating from this. But if I was starting all over, I would get more specific. And like she was saying, like I don't think these creators who say that are bad people. I don't necessarily think they're lying either. It's just kind of like it's very easy to like forget what it was like to be in a beginner and kind of like massage out your story and your messaging and stuff like that. Because like I know for a fact, a lot of people who will say, "Oh yeah, you just write about what you want." The way they started was they actually were niche providers, did freelancing service businesses, stuff like that, or hyper targeted coaching. Then they expanded to this sort of like all knowing, like omniscient sort of like guru person. You will have an extremely difficult time trying to pull that off. So I would most likely avoid it.
I would also say it's a matter of timing. Like if you write about whatever you want to write about and you publish a post daily, you're going to have a lot of reps, and maybe some of them are going to take off. Your list is going to grow and people will like you for being who you are. But you will definitely have to publish and try and do a lot more than if you knew who you're talking to and you have somewhat of a content calendar. You have an idea of what the problem is you're solving and who you are, why you are unique, what you're bringing to the table, and why people should pay attention to your unique perspective and your unique story. It's different paths. It's just one is certainly more time consuming and based on much more trial and error than the other version, where you would have somewhat of a safer bet if you have the right answers in terms of why do you do what you do, who are you serving, how are you helping them, why should they pay attention, etc., etc. All right. That was a very long, but I think incredibly valuable answers. So thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts. Thank you for everyone being with us and listening today. Thank you for your time, Ayo. It's been a pleasure. It's been really interesting for me to dig into these topics. I know we talked a lot about writing specific stuff in the past, but this has been more on the business side and I really enjoyed it. So thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. And thanks for sharing all of this with us.
Yeah, I had a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Do you want to share how people can best connect with you? Do you have a link to put in the chat?
I'll just put my Twitter. Twitter is kind of, or X, excuse me. Sorry, Elon. X is where I've been.
Weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been hanging a lot on X a lot, so you can follow me there. Ayo the author. I create content on different platforms at Ayo the author. Ayo the author on Twitter, Ayo the author on LinkedIn, Instagram, all those places. So just come find me. Come hang out with me on social. Give me a little follow. We'll be friends. But yeah.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for being here. I'll see you in one of the next sessions. Bye-bye.
All right, take care, guys.